Busy Phillips, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad that we were able to find a time.
We moved those pieces. We made it happen.
Oh, it's got to do it. Got to do it these days.
I know. It takes a lot these days. But, you know, when I think about you and I think about the words that immediately come to mind, there are a couple. Bold, determined, defiant, you know, they associated with you in headlines and really to me actually are what I think about when I hear you and I see you. I'm wondering whether those same qualities were on display when you were a child. The Busy we know now, how different is she from the child that grew up in Arizona?
Oh, yeah, no, I think I've always been this person. Yeah. I've definitely always been very outspoken, very sure of my convictions. And I mean, you know, a lot of people called me loud, if we're being honest. I mean, that's like, you know, I got a lot of that. I got a lot of like, you're a lot, you're too much, you're so loud.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Where does it come from? That sure-footedness, that kind of just sense of your own self.
It's interesting because now I'm a mom and I have 2 kids. And so, you know, I would say that it's a combination of nurture and nature. Like, I think that sometimes people show up in the world and they just are, you know?
Right.
And I think that is true in my case. And then I also think that I had parents that were very encouraging and took me seriously and listened and had my back, even when I didn't do great in school, you know, to be honest. And my mom was always like going to bat for me and showing up and trying to figure out a better way. And you know, I think that there's a combination. And then, like, I just recently found out,
right,
in the last 6 months or so, you know, my mom's kind of funny. Like, she would say things to me once I really started doing a lot of work in the abortion space. Mm-hmm. And after I testified before Congress, my mom's like, Busy, I just don't know where you get. I mean, I don't know where you get it. You're so strong. You have the strength and you know, the power of your convictions. And so then it's kind of a long story, but basically through my aunt, who my mom and my aunt aren't really like close. You know what I mean? They're not really, it's one of those situations in a family.
Yeah. We've got those. Yeah.
And I didn't really know my aunt that much growing up, but I have sort of reconnected with her, and she filled me in on her and my mother's grandfather, my great-grandfather, who
What did you learn?
He was a socialist, activist, Episcopalian priest. Yes, at the turn of the century. There were these like socialist priests that really believed, and by the way, I mean, I'm not a religious person at this point in my life, but it is wild and very interesting to me how religion has been sort of co-opted to push very anti-Christian agenda. Right. But these socialist priests at the turn of the century were really fighting and saying, like, look, if you believe in this book, then what we have to do is act as if. We have to protect those among us who are the most vulnerable. That's right. And my great-grandfather wrote like a book about it.
That's crazy because I was going to ask you, can you trace the roots of your activism to anything in your childhood, or probably really now to your broader past, or your genetic lineage?
Well, right. I mean, and that is something that's so interesting. You know, you think about like generational trauma or sort of, you know, a lot of like inherit, and we know now scientifically, like this stuff exists, right? It is carried in it changes our DNA. It is carried in us.
It's in our mitochondria. It's in our bodies. It's woven into us.
It's a part of us. So I guess it stands to reason, right? Like, why wouldn't those beliefs that I have held since I can remember. This like feeling of like seeing this injustice all around me and knowing it's not okay and wanting to do something about it since I was a little person. Maybe that's just that piece got put in me, in my DNA. From my great grandfather, and who knows where he got it from. But you know what I mean? Like it's possible.
I think that's really powerful. It's a really powerful thought. Do you remember the first time you spoke up to against or to advocate for something as a child before you became the Busy Phillips we know today publicly?
I remember there was an assembly that was about sort of like hate speech. I think it was like sort of like an early idea, to be honest with you, because I'm 43. So I was in high school in like the mid-ish 90s. I graduated in 97. So I was probably a freshman in high school, and there was an assembly about hate speech, and I got up because I felt like everybody was being really disingenuous in this assembly. You know, I had a very good friend who was gay and open to close friends, but in Arizona in like 93 or whatever, you know, that wasn't going to be cool.
It wasn't going to be an easy path.
Right. And it took him a few years. But you know, the slur for a gay person that is now, I mean, I won't use it, but like it's been co-opted by the gay community. But you know what I'm saying? The F slur.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was like very a part of how boys communicated to each other in my high school. And I hated it so much. And, you know, and they're doing it around kids like my friends who they didn't know were gay. Anyway, I got up to say something in the...
Did you know what you were going to say?
No, no. And then I swore at the end, which was...
What did you say?
Just, guys, you got to think before you say shit. And then like sort of the whole auditorium. Yeah, exactly. And then I was like, oh, oops, sorry. You know, thereby proving my point, I guess. But I just was so fired up about it. And, you know, there are so many things that I don't even remember. But at my high school reunion many years ago now, my God, a kid came up to me and was like, do you remember getting into a fight with me senior year in government about, I think it was about marriage equality, like gay marriage specifically. And I was like, no, I don't. I don't remember getting into that fight.
You were just being you.
Yeah.
You were just using your voice and your convictions.
Yeah. And I kind of was just always that kid. Like I would do it in class constantly. That assembly was the first time I remember like standing up in front of, you know, authority, the heads of our school and the teachers and all that, and the student body. It was more, more eyeballs on me, but I was sort of always doing it.
You took that same sense of self and assuredness and carried that along with this desire to act, and you brought that to LA and you got into the business when you were 19. I mean, when you think about that now as a 19-year-old taking on this business, when you reflect on it, what stands out for you?
I mean, I really just had this unbelievable conviction and drive and like belief in myself. And I am sort of, it is funny when I look back on it. I'm like, what a little ball of
it's
fire.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I really connected with that because I left home at 16 because I wanted to be an actress. I left Sierra Leone, West Africa, moved back to London. So when I read that you had like this conviction, you're like, this is what I'm going to do. I was like, wow, to be so sure
I was so sure. But you were too, right?
Yeah.
And you knew it wasn't going to happen there. You had to like make moves.
No, absolutely. But then you get into an industry, you know, I think one thing when I got to London, I got an agent and, you know, they did the thing, you can't wear glasses, you need to get contact lenses, you need to look a certain way. The realities of, you know, being a black girl in London, because I was 16 at the time, not getting many auditions. You know, those realities all started to kick in. For you, you've been very honest. You've written about it. You've talked about the harshness of the business.
Yeah.
You've spoken the quiet parts out loud.
Right.
Has that been easy for you?
I mean, I didn't do it until I didn't care anymore. You know, I didn't, to be totally honest with myself. I'm hard on people. I'm hard on others. I am hardest on myself always. And so that piece of it, the speaking truth to the business part of it, I didn't really fully do publicly until I really didn't care anymore about getting acting jobs, because my career had kind of taken a different path, and I was a mom and knew that as I was getting older, like it is what it is, you know.
It is what it is, yeah.
And furthermore, I had the realization that I can create whatever it is that I want to do. And so I didn't mind telling the stories. Also, I do think I have seen some real changes in the industry. In the last, my dog just got back from her grooming. I have seen some real changes. So I feel like, you know, speaking to what my experience was, although again, this is like, it's so hard to know, because at this point, no one's going to say to me.
Totally. Yes, exactly. You're not the person that
I'm not 19.
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to bring that to you, because they know you'll check them and you'll talk about it.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and she's like similar age to me. And she's like, you know, I think that men don't catcall anymore. I don't think that that's a thing. And I was like,
think they do.
I was like, oh, well, you don't have a 14-year-old daughter, because they do, honey. They're just not catcalling to us.
Exactly.
Because they wouldn't dare, because we're full grown women in control of ourselves, and they know that the risk is too great for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that still depends on where you are, Busy. There's certain places you are, they don't care if you're a 43-year-old. They will still catcall if they want to.
Well,
and they do.
Right. But then they'll have another thing coming from me. And they're not, they don't want it.
Do you still enjoy acting?
I love it now. Yeah. I've gone all the way around.
So wait.
So I took a break from it for a while after Cougar Town, and then I did Danny McBride's show, Vice Principals, because I really love Danny, and I love
he's brilliant.
What he does with his voice and how he sort of shines a light on so many parts of our, especially country, that are just ridiculous. I was just sort of disheartened, and I needed to take a break, and I didn't want to, you know, I was doing like Instagram stories, and they were super successful, and then I got my book deal, and, you know, just doing a bunch of other stuff. So I kind of, and to be honest with you, the parts that I was reading, I'm like, I'm not interested in doing this. Mm-hmm. I don't want to play this trope again. It's not benefiting anyone. So I sort of like took a step back and kind of declared that I was retiring from acting.
Then you did a Brady. Then you did a Tom Brady.
I really came back from retirement. Well, listen, it was 2020. All bets were off. Tina Fey called me and literally offered me my dream job. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, if Tina Fey calls, and we'll talk about Tina Fey and the relationship, but I actually just wanted to clarify the acting and where you stand with that, because now when we think about you, it is very much centered around not just, creative pursuits, which may not necessarily be on screen, the writing and the producing, but also the activism and speaking on issues of, bodily autonomy and abortion and many other things, actually. But how did that become a cornerstone of who you are publicly, these issues?
Well, there was a need for it, for sure.
But there's a need, and many celebrities see the need,
Yeah.
but they don't step up.
Well,
But
I think
you
many
did.
celebrities are stupid. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just the basic. Like, that's the bottom line, right? And they're afraid.
I'm gonna chat. Are they stupid? Or are they scared?
I think that's both. I think there's I think there's both, and there's always a combination, but I think a lot of times people aren't able to critically think for a lot of different reasons. I mean, I think that's part of why our country is where it's at, is the lack of critical thinking.
Critical thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so I think that a lot of people, celebrities who haven't had any sort of higher education, haven't been exposed to different ideas, haven't questioned things, don't feel like they can even speak about anything, because what do they know? And they know it. Like, they're afraid that someone will call them out. And by the way, I'll just say this. I know so much more today than I did certainly like 5 years ago when I started really doing activism work. And I remember feeling sometimes, and occasionally, sometimes when I'm posting things, I'm a little bit like, okay, I need to look into this. No one wants to be that like Coney 2020 person.
Nobody wants
again.
To be
you know what I mean?
Invisible children.
Invisible children.
I remember that.
Yes,
I remember that very clearly.
No one wants to be singing Imagine in that video and be made to look like an idiot. But here's the thing. I don't give a fuck. People have thought I'm an idiot my whole life. It just comes with the blonde hair. I'm not kidding. I have been like exceeding people's expectations in my intelligence and my talent since the day I was born. So I'm fine if people think that I don't have a thought in my head and then I'm able to actually back it up. And I'm also able to ask questions, because there are a lot of things I don't know.
Do you think you're able to take this position, A, because of the somewhat and clearly erroneous lower expectations people have assigned to you, but also because, referencing your bigger point about celebrities and them being stupid or scared, because you have got this slightly disassociated position with the acting. You love it, but like you said, you don't really give a fuck. Like, you enjoy it, but is it because you have that or perspective? Is that what also gives you the confidence to speak up?
Yes. I think perspective is huge. I think a lot of people lack perspective too. And self-awareness, right?
Right. Because if you're in it and you're like moving from movie to movie and you're surrounded by teams of people who are marshalling what you say, think, eat, look, right. You don't get the perspective. You don't get the distance to stand back and say, this is an issue where I could really use my platform and my voice for good.
And so frequently it happens to be that people only feel comfortable speaking out about something that has impacted them or someone they love, personally. But, I guess the truth is, first of all, I see almost everything is interconnected. Mm-hmm. That's very clear. And I've never felt like I need to be an expert, because I'm not saying I'm an expert ever. I'm just saying this is a thing I've become aware of. More people could stand to become aware of this thing that's happening right now. And maybe we need to pay attention.
Like you said, you're not claiming to be an expert. You're saying that these are issues that we could stand to know about and discuss and care about. You have spoken publicly about having an abortion at 15. You've testified before Congress about that. Was there much internal debate, or better yet, how much internal debate did you have before you went public with your own story?
Well, I had never talked about it publicly because, you know, before social media, when you were an actor, and especially someone like at my sort of moderately successful television acting level, you know, you're really at the mercy of whatever journalist is interviewing you for like Cosmo or Elle or whatever, and they're delivering a 400-word story, you know, and I never thought that would be. I just had very early, like, experiences very early on where I would spend, you know, like a whole afternoon with a reporter, and then I would see the article written with my pretty pictures in some magazine, and it's like, Phillips laughs and like orders another cappuccino.
Phillips has really great blonde hair.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, it just was always so reductive, and it just never, and it never sounded the way that I talked. Like, it was always just this total fabrication of who I felt like I was. And then social media comes along. I kind of like got the hang of Twitter early on, and people were like, oh, hey, you're actually funny. You've got some hot takes. And then, you know, once I had my book deal, I knew that the story of my abortion was always going to be something that I wanted to write about, because I wanted to write about it in my own voice, in my own way, on my own terms, and be able to tell the entirety of the story and what was a complex situation for me. Mm-hmm. Because of my age, because of my Catholic upbringing, because of the community I was surrounded by at the time. And, you know, it was nuanced, and I wanted to be able to put that whole thing forward, you know. But I was always afraid of retaliation from anti-abortion people, because they've just historically been so horrible and violent. And I wasn't excited about that part of it. And I remember feeling a little bit like when my book came out and all the press was about James Franco and my experience on Freaks and Geeks, there was a part of me that was like, oh, thank God the anti-abortion people like aren't going to come for me. And sorry, go ahead.
Did that hold? No, I was going to ask, did that hold? That they're kind of leaving you alone.
Well, yeah, based on my book, yeah, 100%. I mean, that was never.
Since then,
well, and then so my book came out in the fall of 2018, the same time that my late night talk show premiered on E, and around the same time that a couple of these states started passing what they were erroneously calling heartbeat bills, but were actually extreme abortion bans. And look, abortion had some bad press. Planned Parenthood had struggled, you know, like in the last 25 years. Planned Parenthood is like one of my favorite places on earth. They do such amazing work. But, you know, there have been so many targeted campaigns to vilify providers that it felt complicated and messy to step into that always. But these extreme abortion bans started being passed. And I remember saying to Casey St. Ange, who's my showrunner at the time, and now we do the podcast together. My whole point, the only reason why I wanted to make this a late night talk show and not a daytime talk show, was because women so rarely get the opportunity to do late night talk shows.
That's right.
And I just felt like if I can carve out one more space for it, then that is at least something. And part of the reason why I wanted to do that is because when things like this happen, late night shows get their hot takes on it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But none of these dudes are going to say anything about these extreme abortion bans. And they didn't. But we could. I could. And really, I could. Because I had had an abortion. And because, you know, for a while, I think a lot of even women or trans people who have uteruses who hadn't had an abortion felt weird about being in support of abortion. They're like, well, I can't really speak. I've never had that, so I don't know. I can't. Like, I've heard that from people.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I've heard that too.
It's crazy.
I've heard that. But what we're really saying, it's the right to decide, right? Regardless of whether you've had one or not.
Right. This is what the whole world is dealing with right now, right?
Yeah,
this is sovereignty.
Absolutely. You know, it is sovereignty. It is self-determination, right? So how are you feeling in this moment? 100 days gone. 100 days, more than 100 days have passed since the Supreme Court struck down. I can't even believe I'm saying the words. Even now, 100 days plus, overturned Roe versus Wade and struck down the constitutional right to abortion. And more than a dozen states have made abortion largely unavailable. I think I read last night something like 66 clinics have, according to a report by the Goodmaker Institute, between stopped providing abortions or severely restricted services. How are you processing all of this?
Well, it's a humanitarian emergency. We have now, first of all, confirmation that those that were in power before this administration were sort of instituting a Christian right government. And that's what they're...
And some would say judiciary.
And judiciary.
Yes.
Yeah. Well...
right?
Yeah.
That they were laying the foundation
They did lay the foundation for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is devastating. And all of the stories that have been and continue to come out about what is happening to children and women and people who need care in these states, what they're going through, is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Another point that I do think really deserves to be brought up in this conversation is that I was incredibly moved by Chrissy Teigen's speech a few weeks back, and her admission that she didn't understand that what happened when she was 20 weeks pregnant and their baby died, that was actually considered abortion care.
Yeah.
And so I've been looking into it because I did some Instagram stories just in support of her. I had seen so many mean, horrible, disgusting.
Were you shocked by that?
Shocked.
I was taken aback.
Shocked.
I know social media can be such a beautiful place, but it can be such a cesspool as well. And I was stunned at the cruelty.
I'm sort of like, I guess, and here's my question to you, like, should we be shocked by cruelty toward women at this point?
No.
But we still are every time.
We still are. But I think maybe it was the fact that here was a woman who expressed such deep vulnerability and such deep pain. And I'm used to women minding their own business and being the target of cruelty.
Right.
But this felt so personal, and it's always personal, but there's a particular intensity to it that took my breath away.
Yeah. Well, I also think that I think there are a lot of people in this country that don't understand that they've had abortions and that they've benefited from abortion care. So, we say the statistic, 1 in 4 women before age 40 will access abortion care. That actually, and Guttmacher and Planned Parenthood is like working on it for me because I don't believe that's the real statistic.
You think it's actually more women?
Way more. Because what ended up happening is that doctors and healthcare providers changed the coding. That's how they get statistics. But they changed the coding in miscarriage care because the stigma attached with the word abortion was so about an unwanted, undesired pregnancy. And by the way, the anti-abortion side did such a bang up job of marketing it as murder that healthcare providers didn't want to further traumatize women and families who were going through the worst moment of their life with a very wanted pregnancy. And so they started coding it differently to be a D&C or a D&E and sometimes, or just miscarriage care. And in fact, I've now talked to my friend Amelia, who runs the incredible organization Shout Your Abortion. And she's talked to a few providers and nurses who've said, oh, I've had doctors tell me not to record it as abortion care. Yes, because the stigma became so great with that word that they didn't want these women to be re-traumatized. So they would call it something else. They would say like, okay, well, we're going to go and we're going to help, take the rest out and, or whatever. They just didn't, it wasn't clear as to what it was. And when I posted that, this all happened because after I posted some stories in support of Chrissy, who I don't really know. I mean, I've DM'd with her on Instagram a couple times, but my heart was breaking for her. I can't, it's so horrible. I had hundreds of DMs from women saying, wow, but that's not what they're taking away in these states, right? I had a miscarriage. I had a D&C after a miscarriage. People can still get those. Oh no, they cannot. Oh no, this is exactly what it is. I had people sending me DMs. Wait, so I had a miscarriage at 16 weeks and I needed to get a D, and my doctor said I needed a D&E and I had one. Is that an abortion? Yes, that's an abortion.
So there are two things you're bringing up here. One, a need to fully understand the scope of what abortion services are. Right. And which clearly, to your point, has become quite reductive in the conversation because it's been, rebranded by the anti-abortion side. And also the broader just lack of awareness on the part of the general public of what is really at stake here.
But these fucking, sorry I'm swearing, but these politicians, as much as you want, but they don't even know what's at stake. They don't even, it's just all of this is a theoretical.
What is this about? That's really what I spend a lot of time. I don't know why I bother to ask that question because it doesn't really matter what their motivations are. But what do you think is the motivation for this gutting of our rights and our autonomy?
White supremacy and patriarchy?
No. I just wanted to hear you say it.
A racist patriarchal agenda
just wanted you to say
to keep white men in charge of other people.
What are my decisions that what have the decisions that I may choose to make with my own medical provider got to do with somebody sitting in, I know I just
well, it has everything to do. Because if women are able to control their own futures and decide when they want to be parents, then they're able to access higher education, be exposed to critical thinking skills, have careers, join the workforce, have financial independence, not be forced into staying with an abuser or a person who they feel forced to stay with for the sake of the children. They can be more participatory in society, and then one would stand to reason they would gain more power. And once that happens, well, these motherfuckers are threatened, aren't they? Because they're just little babies.
What's the role for pro-choice men as we talk about reconfiguring this conversation?
I think pro-choice men need to understand just how much they have benefited from abortion. And they need to get real loud. And, you know, I've had this conversation because my kids, we send our children to a private school. Like, there are very wealthy people who work in like finance and banks and all the things that, you know, are tough for me to deal with. But I've had this conversation where I'm just like, if you are voting for your taxes in this moment in time, you are a bad person. Mm-hmm. And I want you to look at that and look at what your value is and what you're saying your value is. And I don't want to hear, there's no argument. You are a bad person. You are putting your own wealth and pocketbook and townhouse and boat and whatever else ahead of human beings. And I don't want to...
Which this country has historically done.
I know.
So,
but it doesn't mean that we can't want better.
No, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't advocate for better and we shouldn't demand better. So that leads me to midterms.
Yes.
My head may explode. What is your thinking? You're part of the Vote Mama organization.
Lobby. Yeah.
Lobby.
Uh-huh.
You lead the Creative Council. Talk to me and explain to our viewers, our listeners and viewers, what Vote Mama is about, the mission, and talk to me about how you're feeling ahead of these midterms and what's at stake here.
I'm trying so hard to not be paralyzed with fear by these midterms coming up. I actually just did a Q&A panel thing for Vote Mama with two incredible women, moms, running for re-election of Secretary of State in New Mexico and Michigan, two places that had contested elections from these, very, interesting people who don't believe in things like the truth and science, and have really been led astray by
would you
a
call
false
them
prophet.
Let's call them deniers.
Deniers. They're deniers. Yeah, you're right. They're deniers. And I was actually given hope by my conversation with these women because they are so focused on making sure that our democracy stays intact. And truly, that is the bottom line of these midterms. What is at stake is democracy itself. And, Michigan is seeing a record number of voter registration, a record number of people requesting absentee ballots, surpassing, regular general elections. So for a midterm, it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is, to me, the moment, like Kansas and what happened with Kansas when they put the abortion ban to a vote. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And people showed up, And I think that if there is any silver lining to Trump, Dobbs, the insurrection, just the horrors that we have seen, really a lot of people have seen for the first time. I mean, which also is so annoying that so many white people have to see it with their own eyes before they believe it. But
to feel the threat aimed at them to believe the threat is real, right?
Right. But I mean, you know, I felt like I've been talking to friends and people I know for 6 years about how Roe will be overturned. This is going to happen. This is the agenda. It's going to happen.
You felt that all that time ago.
Well, once Trump got elected, for sure. That was it.
I just thought, you know, I was one of these people who thought that just precedent. I don't know. I really believed in the law, in the precedent that was set. To think that I would witness people saying, you know, Alito saying there's no right to privacy, that precedent was erroneous. Like, I am going to be very transparent. It makes make me sound like an idiot. I did not think we could get here.
It doesn't make you sound like an idiot. It was their plan. It's the greatest trick that the devil ever pulled, was convincing you that he didn't exist. They told us that it was safe. But then, two things I felt. Number one, a man was put in office who declared that the truth wasn't true. That's number one. So once the sky is green, all bets are off. And number two, I have always been aware of how sort of women aren't considered in our society and our culture. But with that election and everything leading up to it, after he took power, I remember feeling like on election night, I remember sobbing uncontrollably and saying, they hate women. They hate us. They don't want us anywhere near anything. They hate us. And then last presidential cycle, when you see all of these incredibly, and so many people I was friends with, liberal people, you know what? I honestly, I don't even know if I can get it up to go to the voting booth for Clinton. I can't support the oligarchy of the Clintons or whatever the fuck they were saying. And, you know, I had like some younger, very liberal friends who were like, I'm sitting this one out. And I was like, you better not sit this out, guys. Like, this guy could, you know,
could torpedo democracy. And
then, you know, I would vote for Elizabeth Warren. And then guess what? No, they didn't. No, they didn't vote for Klobuchar. No, they didn't vote for Kamala. No, they did not.
So that brings me
because people fucking hate women. They do.
But that brings me to another point then. Seeing that passivity in the face of a threat, how do we break through on these issues? How do we break through on issues of abortion and bodily autonomy and people understanding the threat? Because you just laid it out. Having Trump on the ballot and knowing what that threat was and still having friends say, and
dudes. They were dudes. They were guys.
And there were plenty of other women who were like,
Oh, and white women, we know.
Yeah,
we know the white
data.
women.
We know the data. So how do, as an activist, in the face of apathy, how do you break through to activate people?
I mean, I think storytelling is huge. I hate that word. It's so cheesy.
Why do you hate that word?
What? You hate it too?
Why do you hate it? No,
I hate it.
You said that. I'm like,
no. It's just like
we're all storytellers, Busy.
Yeah, I mean, we are, but it's so I don't know. It feels like it just feels like I should be like in a coffee shop somewhere, like
strumming like your guitar.
Yeah, doing my open mic, just talking about how I tell stories. But I think that the stories we tell are important, and I think that women especially we have allowed ourselves, I allowed myself to be shamed into silence for many years. Not just about my abortion, about sexual assault, about disgusting misogynistic behavior, about abuse, all of those things that I think we were sort of led to believe was ours to hold.
And we're holding it, I think, because we don't want to make men feel uncomfortable.
That's right.
Like, what kind of bullshit is that?
Insane. Well, it's the bullshit. It's the ingrained patriarchal stuff. Like, I know better than to look in the mirror and get upset about the weight I've gained during the last 2 years in COVID. Like, I'm a feminist, man. Like, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I can, and I know I'm better than this. But I grew up with a mother that was never not on a diet. I grew up with like the messages on every magazine in the 80s and 90s telling me how to lose inches overnight. It is so deep in my brain that even after like my years of deprogramming myself, I still will look in the mirror and be like, ugh, gross, Mm-hmm. And I hear myself and I'm like, shut up, but I can't. And I think the same is true for how ingrained misogyny and white supremacy is in all of our lives. And like breaking yourself of that belief of that, like, you might not even be aware that you have. Yeah. So we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep making it a point to have these conversations, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the like moms at my kids' new school are like, okay, I see. We don't need to talk about our periods that much. I'm like, no, we actually do. I need to talk about my period right now. Like I don't see any other way to change it. And maybe
social media, how do you use social media as part of this? Which has such great promise, but such great pitfalls.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I think it's a great way to get information and to honestly spotlight and uplift other voices that can use that kind of attention, and organizations. And I think that like, it's great for starting conversations. And I think it's great for really asking questions. And then, you'll get the inevitable, like, I'm going to murder you and fuck your dead corpse.
Oh
but
my God.
I mean, what are we going to do? What am I going to do? Just block and delete, I guess. I think it can really be, I do think that through these stories that we're hearing and seeing, I think even men are having a greater understanding of what this is and what bodily autonomy actually means, and the very dire consequences of what these laws being put in place.
So what does success look like to you in this fight when we're talking about issues of bodily autonomy and abortion? As you look to the future, what goals have you set for yourself in terms of using your voice?
I want to continue making sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that just because a thing happens to us, it is not just ours to hold. And you know, I hope that people continue to pay attention and show up, and I hope that people with like real morals and real belief systems intact can take a look at how and if the way that they've voted and the way that they vote aligns with that.
And your message to other celebrities who have platforms at a time like this?
I mean, no one's ever been mad at anyone for asking a question. There are plenty of people from all kinds of organizations that want to give you answers, always. And there are great, you know, America Ferrera started an organization called Harness that sort of helps to educate artists. And, you know, I at this point am involved with so many different organizations. Kerry Washington has a great organization as well. What is hers called? Vote for Change?
Is it Vote for Change, or is she just aligned with Vote for Change? I didn't know if it was hers. But
know,
basically, being passive is just not acceptable. Is really ultimately the message for whether you're a celebrity or not. I mean, I think that's essentially why I'm doing this show, to help people understand that.
I think that democracy is a participation sport. And I actually have always thought that, and maybe that's a thing that's just been inside of me. But also, I remember my mom volunteering to be a poll worker when I was really little, before she had gone back to work full time. I remember my mom has never thrown away her jury duty summons, you know, has always showed up for jury duty, because my mom was like, well, the system only works if we all show up. And that is the truth. The system only works if we all show up, and we have to all show up. And because they're trying to like silence and thwart the voices of people who don't agree with, you know, upholding their agendas, right? Through voter suppression and all kinds of other gerrymandering. So we all have to like really show up.
Busy Phillips, I think that's a great place to leave it. We've got to show up.
We've got to
We
don't have a choice.
Well, we do, but it's not going to be good if we don't. You know, the consequences are huge if we don't. So
they already are happening.
They are in real time.
In real time.
In real time. Busy Phillips, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
You too. You're so great. I just adore you.
Thank you so, so much. Stay warm in New York.